Welcome to Vineyard Church Dungannon, where we're walking together deeper into faith. The following message was given at one of our Sunday gatherings. For more information, visit vineyarddungannon.co.uk.
So, ladies, I hope you all enjoyed your breakfast earlier on. Big thanks to Paul Fenton in particular for organising it. So, quite impressed at Tom's pancakes as well, it had to be said. So we planned well for that. So what I have to say is perhaps I'm responsible for sort of planning the services and things like that, and I forgot it was Mother's Day. So we haven't done terribly well in actually getting a suitable topic for Mother's Day. What we're talking about today is an evil tyrant. So I don't wish anybody to be offended in any way. We will draw no conclusions from that, but there are in fact lessons as to actually the importance of a mother in it, because I think he was rather badly brought up. So we will touch on that a little as we go along. But before we start, we're just going to read a whole chapter. We're going to invite First Emanuela to come up and just read the first part of the story, and then Peter's going to come up after that as well, just so that we get a sort of idea of what we are preaching on today. So go ahead, Emanuela, there, and we'll let you go with that. Thank you.
King Belshazzar gave a great banquet for 1,000 of his nobles and drank wine with them. While Belshazzar was drinking his wine, he gave orders to bring in the gold and the silver goblets that Nebuchadnezzar, his father, had taken from the temple in Jerusalem, so that the king and his nobles, his wives, and his concubines might drink from them. So they brought in the gold goblets that had been taken from the temple of God in Jerusalem. And the king and his nobles, his wives, and his concubines drank from them. As they drank the wine, they praised the God of gold and silver, of bronze, iron, wood, and stone. Suddenly, the fingers of a human hand appeared and wrote on the plaster of the wall near the lampstand in the royal palace. The king watched the hand as it wrote. His face turned pale, and he was so frightened that his legs became weak and his knees were knocking. The king summoned the enchanters, the astrologers, and diviners. Then he said to these wise men of Babylon, "Whoever reads this writing and tells me what it means will be clothed in purple and have a gold chain placed around his neck, and he will be made the third highest ruler in the kingdom." Then all the king's wise men came in, but they could not read the writing or tell the king what it meant. So King Belshazzar became even more terrified, and his face grew more pale. His nobles were baffled. The queen, hearing the voices of the king and his nobles, came into the banquet hall. "May the king live forever," she said. "Don't be alarmed, don't look so pale. There is a man in your kingdom who has the spirit of the holy gods in him. In the time of your father, he was found to have insight and intelligence and wisdom like that of the gods. Your father, King Nebuchadnezzar, appointed him chief of the magicians, enchanters, astrologers, and diviners. He did this because Daniel, whom the king called Belshazzar, was found to have keen mind and knowledge and understanding, and also the ability to interpret dreams, explain riddles, and solve different problems. Call for Daniel, and he will tell you what the writing means."
So Daniel was brought before the king, and the king said to him, "Are you Daniel, one of the exiles my father the king brought from Judah? I have heard that the spirit of the gods is in you, and that you have insight, intelligence, and outstanding wisdom. The wise men and enchanters were brought before me to read this writing and tell me what it means, but they could not explain it. Now I have heard that you are able to give interpretations and to solve difficult problems. If you can read this writing and tell me what it means, you'll be clothed in purple and have a gold chain placed around your neck, and you will be made the third highest ruler in the kingdom." So then Daniel answered the king, "You may keep your gifts for yourself and give your rewards to someone else. Nevertheless, I will read the writing for the king and tell him what it means. Your Majesty, the Most High God gave your father Nebuchadnezzar sovereignty and greatness and glory and splendor. Because of the high position he gave him, all the nations and peoples of every language dreaded and feared him. Those the king wanted to put to death, he put to death. Those he wanted to spare, he spared. Those he wanted to promote, he promoted. And those he wanted to humble, he humbled. But when his heart became arrogant and hardened with pride, he was deposed from his royal throne and stripped of his glory. He was driven away from people and given the mind of an animal. He lived with the wild donkeys and ate grass like the ox, and his body was drenched with the dew of heaven, until he acknowledged that the Most High God is sovereign over all kingdoms on earth, and sets over them anyone he wishes. But you, Belshazzar, his son, have not humbled yourself, though you knew all this. Instead, you have set yourself up against the Lord of heaven. You had the goblets from his temple brought to you, and you and your nobles, your wives and your concubines, drank wine from them. You praised the gods of silver and gold, of bronze, iron, wood, and stone, which cannot see or hear or understand. But you did not honor the God who holds in his hand your life and all your ways. Therefore he sent the hand that wrote the inscription. This is the inscription that was written. Mene, mene, tekel, parson. Here's what these words mean. Mene, God has numbered the days of your reign and brought it to an end. Tekel, you have been weighed on the scales and found wanting. Peres, your kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and Persians. Then at Belshazzar's command, Daniel was clothed in purple. A gold chain was placed around his neck, and he was proclaimed the third highest ruler in the kingdom. That very night, Belshazzar, king of the Babylonians, was slain, and Darius the Mede took over the kingdom at the age of 62.
Yeah, thank you, that was great. Just another slightly irreverent thought struck me there as Emanuela was reading with her nice English accent. We're saying at least the English did one useful thing for us this weekend. So thank you. You did much better than your compatriots. Thank you, Emanuela. Listen, what we're sort of covering today is it's a number of life lessons. I mean, we've just read a relatively long passage there, but what you have is sometimes somebody say the Bible is a bit dull and boring. It never really appears that to me, to be quite honest. Apart from potentially maybe the lists sometime that you get, they can't maybe not that exciting. But there's so many stories, there's so many lessons, there's so much evidence of God moving. And there's a few messages that are coming out of this passage, so I'm just sort of throwing them up at the start, and then we'll deal with them as we go along later on as well. But the first thing is this here: no matter how good you are at something, it's really dangerous to believe your own hype and to believe that you are the best at everything and I cannot make a mistake and all the rest of it. And actually it's interesting, I've also observed that some people who are not very good at things just believe their own hype anyway. So really important lesson that comes out, and the importance of different people around us actually bringing us back down to size and guiding us. Second thing is this, is that power, authority, anything like that there can corrupt unless it is fully grounded. You know, lots of people in this world want power. Why? Often it's just to give themselves a better life, to seem important, to be recognized by others, but completely wrong motivation. And the challenge in Scripture is that power, authority, that leadership is given to people to serve. It's a service position. It is not a self-aggrandizing position. It's not there to make you look good. And when that is done, it goes completely wrong. It's completely countercultural to what God wants. Third thing is this here. I was noticing Keith Warwick's laughing at something there. A man said about believing your own hype. We'll follow off. It says, choose your friends carefully. And I was going to say, as I look around this room, I see many, many people who have been such good friends to me. And actually, every now and again, have pulled me up on something or pointed me in another direction. And that's really, really, really useful. Really important. And we'll see, really, in this situation where this guy, Belshazzar, didn't have that at all. The fourth one is this: living only for yourself is a road to nowhere. Again, Belshazzar lives for himself. It's all about him. It's his magnificence, his power, all that. It's all about him. And actually, it's a road to absolutely nowhere. God must be central. And then the last one is this: God is sovereign. Kings, queens, prime ministers, presidents, empires, nations rise and fall under his command. And because we are actually very finite, sometimes we don't see this. But one of the really interesting things to do, and a challenge if any of you are interested, there's a wee YouTube video that basically says 1,000 years of Europe. And what it does, it shows all the boundary moves in Europe over the last 1,000 years, and it's absolutely unbelievable how quickly things change. Countries come, go, and, you know, it would make you dizzy actually watching it sometimes. And so things are not that we think are not permanent. God is permanent, God is sovereign, He is unchanging. And that's one of the messages that comes out of this passage. So I want to give you a little bit of context then for this. So Nebuchadnezzar has died. And there's a lot, sometimes when you read the Bible as well, it's a bit of an overview, and it doesn't go into huge detail, but essentially what has happened here, Nebuchadnezzar has died, and he has been succeeded. So it simply seems that, okay, Belshazzar, his son, away it goes, and his son then takes over. But that wasn't the way it worked. First we would say is that Belshazzar was not Nebuchadnezzar's son. It was a royal term. The one that followed on was termed the son. But in fact, it was Belshazzar's father who was the king. But interestingly, there had been another king just after Nebuchadnezzar that it is widely believed that Belshazzar murdered so that he could put his dad in. And he knew his dad was old, so as soon as his dad dies, he was going to get it then afterwards. So there's a huge amount of political maneuvering. And Belshazzar also acts as king because his father actually they basically ruled for 17 years. I think it was 556 to 7 or to 539. But his father spent 10 years in an oasis in the desert. Now, I have no idea why. There's no real explanation as to why he did that. But the father went off, lived in the desert, and Belshazzar was sent back to rule at the center of the kingdom, which was Babylon. And he ruled as if he was a king. There were a couple of things he wasn't allowed to do, but essentially he was known as King Belshazzar. And it was as simple there. So I don't know whether I haven't really covered the actual points in that in huge detail, but it just gives you a bit of an idea as to where it was. But the other thing that we don't recognize sometimes is this here. And remember is that this was a really hated kingdom. Now, I was going to claim that this was a photograph. I was watching a program last night where somebody claimed to have a photograph of a dinosaur, and they were reassured that they didn't. But then again, this is not a photo, but it's a little bit of a reconstruction as to what Babylon would have looked like. And you can see it's incredibly sophisticated. You know, and if you arrived there, you know, from the sticks, you would be overawed. Funny, I was looking at a picture the other day. I look at strange things clearly, but it was a picture of Phoenix in Arizona in 1930 versus now. And it just looked like such a pleasant place in 1930. And it was nice streets and open and all. And then the next thing you look at it now, it's all skyscrapers and everything. It's amazing. But actually, if the people from 1930 could have arrived in Phoenix now, they would be amazed. And so this is the center of the world. This is where power resides. And it looks very sophisticated there. But again, as a reminder, the last time we showed you that money doesn't always buy taste. There we go. And they did a lot of painting. Sorry, we should go back up to that. I pressed that button twice. You have to remember this, that it takes 2 seconds to move. So it was, you know, you can see it was gaudy. It was all designed to impress. And actually, whenever you were the ruler there, you started to believe your own hype. You're the center of the world, and you're actually the central person in the center of the world. And that's a real problem. So, just to be clear, Belshazzar then was a prince. He was the son of Nabonidus, sorry, that's his name, and he gave the kingdom to Belshazzar to rule it while he went off to live in an oasis somewhere in the desert. Again, we don't know why. But Belshazzar was not a good king. He ignored and he opposed God. And we're just going to quickly look at this Belshazzar the man. So there's a number of things that we can see even very, very quickly here. That he had multiple personality traits. He may have had multiple personalities too, I don't know. But he had a real desire for power. He was the man. He wanted power for the wrong reasons because he wanted to be worshipped and praised. He was the central character as far as he was concerned. He was hedonistic. And that just means he was he just lived for pleasure. He was a real party animal. And he had multiple wives and multiple concubines, which are just women that he hasn't married, but he keeps in the harem. And his attitudes were completely wrong. I'm saying he was possibly a murderer. He was almost certainly a murderer in terms of, and he also would have passed down many death sentences as king as well. He was completely narcissistic. It was all about him. And if you ever dealt with a narcissist, they're very problematic to deal with. Very problematic because, their central reference point is them. Everything is about making them look good, and any of their behavioural traits that are negative, no, you cause it or somebody else caused it, it's never my fault. And that's a challenge to each one of us as well. We are sometimes to blame. It is sometimes our fault. It is sometimes our responsibility, and we need to do something about it. And Belshazzar didn't do this. And because he gets a very short phase in the Bible, we tend to think his reign was short, but it was 17 years. He had plenty of time to interact with many of the Jewish, you couldn't call them Christians, Christ hadn't arrived at that point, but the God followers, and he did have people that he would have interacted that would have pointed him towards God, but actually he had no interest in that. Again, the gods actually were there to support him, and we're going to see that in a wee minute. But the really interesting thing is this here, he knew his history, and Daniel said that to him as he was reading that passage. You saw what happened to your father Nebuchadnezzar, his father in the kingly sense. You saw that he was brought down low, and I think it was Sharon covered all of that, or was it, no, it was you, Ali, actually, sorry. It was Ali covered that, where Nebuchadnezzar the king lived like a wild beast for 7 years because God brought him to his knees. He brought him to the point where he recognized, actually, that God was to be honored and not Nebuchadnezzar. And actually, we think that Nebuchadnezzar came to know God, and actually we would call it term now becoming a Christian from that. But Belshazzar had seen that. He had been about the royal court. He was a prince, and he didn't learn any of those lessons. And the lesson for Nebuchadnezzar, it wasn't just a short one. It would have been the talk of the country and the kingdom and the empire for many, many years. And it was relatively recent history. It was living memory. So he didn't learn lessons. He was obviously self-important. He felt that his thoughts were the best. I don't really need to take advice, up to the point where actually that doesn't happen and he suddenly gets scared. So Belshazzar then, the party. Now, this might look like, okay, we're just about to have a big party here. This is all about his hedonistic lifestyle. It's this, that, and the other. Actually, it's not on this occasion. Because what he does here, he calls thousands of his nobles together and his wives and his concubines. And this was all about political positioning. We know all about political positioning at the minute. It's an interesting world at the minute. But this is exactly what was happening here. Actually, what was happening at the minute outside Babylon was that King Cyrus, who would take over, was already camped round Babylon. The armies had already defeated, Cyrus's armies had already defeated many of the Babylonian armies elsewhere, and they've advanced now, and they're sitting outside the walls. So why does Belshazzar go for a party? He was actually trying to position all his nobles there to encourage them to get ready to fight because our gods will save us. He was pulling them and saying, I'm not worried. We're having a party. Come together and our gods will save us. That's essentially what he was saying. It was a great banquet for thousands of his nobles. The drink was flowing. The sycophants were there. And that's one of the challenges, is that actually, if you start to believe your own hype, you stop listening to advisors around you. You stop listening to people who actually come and tell you, look, have a think about this, or do this, or have you thought about this? And Proverbs actually talks about plans succeeding because of many advisors. And this did not happen for Belshazzar, because everybody was used to saying yes. If he said it, go out, it's nighttime, but the sky's blue. Yeah, it's blue. Yes, definitely. Something wrong with our eyes. You're right. Or whatever. All those type of things, they just agreed with him. And if you are a true friend, you cannot always agree with your other friend. One of the things we want to encourage in this church is godly disagreement. Now, not fights, arguments. We really don't need that. But actually, what we do need to have is actually there will be times when either somebody's views are slightly wrong, or actually there's just two different alternatives. But you know what? That is all right, as long as we are absolutely focused on the central tenets of Christianity. There are many other things that are open to interpretation. And if we are used to disagreeing and debating and understanding that that's part of natural life and it's good, that's fine. If we think that all of us should be the same, we should be completely uniform in our beliefs and should all be doing the same things, as soon as something comes up that's out of that, people get shocked and they get frightened, and you disagree with me, you don't like me, this is dreadful, and walk away. That is not, being together as a group is not the same thing as having to agree on absolutely everything. So please do not think that when somebody disagrees with you, they're saying you're a bad person, or even that you're wrong, or that it's really important that we hold the central tenets of Christianity, but also understand that there are many interpretations around that about what should I do there. I remember years ago, it was considered a sin to go to the cinema, there's the big debates over alcohol, and there's all this here. But actually, the Bible leaves all of those things open to a Christian's own interpretation. And if David decides one thing and I decide another, that's okay. Let's agree to disagree, but it's not something to fall out over. So that's one point I wanted to make. And Belshazzar didn't have that godly disagreement. People just agreed with him. So whatever he said, they thought, "Whoa, where you go, sir." And he then got to the point where he thought he was the bee's knees in everything. And nobody knows everything. Everybody in this room is better than somebody else at something. So always remember that. I used to get nervous, and I used to have to talk to groups. So I used to have to talk to groups of 300, 400 farmers. And you kind of be thinking, flip, this is going to be fun. And I have no idea. But then you suddenly realize that the very specific topic I was talking about, I knew more than any of them. Now, they knew plenty more than me about other things. But at least I sort of knew in that point, okay, on this particular one, I know more than them, and I can put it across. I am the specialist in this topic. So that was fine. But if I'd moved off to another topic, I need to learn to take advice from somebody else. And it's just something that's really, really important to remember. So the party was a place to be. It was a great banquet. The drink was thrown. They were all there. But actually, people just agreed with him, and they never challenged him. But here's the thing, and this is why we talked about narcissists for a minute ago. Narcissists always say wasn't my fault. Somebody else made me do it. It was always somebody else. But the Bible is really clear that actually Belshazzar himself was culpable for his own actions. In other words, he knew what had happened to Nebuchadnezzar. He knew from that actually God was the only God, and yet he refused. He set himself up against it, and it says that. So Nebuchadnezzar had lived in arrogance. God dealt with him. This is what it says. When his heart became arrogant and hardened with pride, he was deposed from the royal throne, stripped of his glory, until he acknowledged that the Most High God is sovereign over all kingdoms on earth and sets over them anyone he wishes. So Nebuchadnezzar came out, and then Nebuchadnezzar had written that whole letter that actually was covered by Ali, where Nebuchadnezzar himself wrote his own story. So Belshazzar knew that God was over all. He knew what he was doing when he set him up against it. He'd seen the warnings for Nebuchadnezzar. He ignored the warnings. And the big danger is that whenever you ignore a warning and ignore a warning and ignore a warning, eventually you come into trouble. And this is what happened. See, he thought he was a central character, the one around things revolved. He believed his own hype, and ultimately he paid the price for it. And this is what then Daniel said to him. And Daniel was a queer, brave man, because he could have been killed for this again. But he said what God gave him to say, and he didn't hold back on it. But you, Belshazzar, his son, have not humbled yourself, though you knew all of this. Instead, you've set yourself up against the Lord of heaven. You had the goblets from his temple brought you, and you and your nobles, your wives and your concubines drank wine from them. You praised the gods of silver, gold, bronze, wood, and stone, iron and stone, which cannot see, cannot hear, and cannot understand, but you didn't honor the God who holds in his hand your life and all your ways. He brought the goblets from the temple. Nebuchadnezzar taken them years ago. They had been consecrated to the worship of God. And what actually Belshazzar was doing here was actually bringing out these goblets and saying, do you remember whenever we conquered Israel? We conquered Jerusalem. And he was actually evoking memories of great conquest in front of the 1,000 nobles as they waited for Cyrus to attack outside. So he said, look, we beat these other boys before, we'll beat these once again. But he dishonored God in doing it. And even if that wasn't his direct intention, God was very angry about it. And that was then the big central. You did not honor the God who holds in his hand your life and all your ways. Belshazzar didn't believe that. He didn't believe that God holds everybody. He didn't believe that God was sovereign. And he was wrong. So we'll just pause there for a minute and then just go off on another wee thing. We've already said this, but this was just at the start, and we're just going into a little bit more detail now. Power is not an end in itself. The only reason for having power is to serve. But many people do not realize that. And unless the power that you have, the leadership that you have, the authority you have is grounded and purposeful, grounded in God with the purpose of serving him and serving other people, It is wrong and flawed. So it's really important that we remember that every time we use our power, like Belshazzar, for pleasure, for ego massaging, to make us seem more important, it is wrong. Can you be really clear again? We say this many times. It doesn't matter if you're at the front of this church preaching or you're sitting at the back and it's your first time here. Every single person in this church is of equal importance. Equal importance. What you do makes no difference to your importance. What you don't do makes no difference to your importance in front of God. You are important. Achievement does not make you important. Really important to remember that. And then on that basis, you can go forward and serve God. But your achievements, no matter how, you could take over all the world and you would still be no important to God than somebody who was living on the poverty line somewhere remote. Every single person is of individual importance to God, of equal importance to God. We just have different gifts and different roles. But it's really, really important to remove it. And whatever your gifts or skills are, it is about service, not about power. It's about other people. It's about God. It's not about you, and it's not about me. To be really clear on that. So position is about doing what is best, not what suits me. Position is about bringing God's kingdom to earth. So your position, your gifts, your skills are about serving God. They're about serving others. They're about bringing God's kingdom to earth. They're about praising God in every situation. And because you're good at it doesn't mean you're more important. Or because you're bad at something else doesn't mean you're less important. Power is about service. Sorry, I've said that several times now. Hopefully it's in. So I shall move on from there. But Jude 12, if this is actually, I think I've pressed that. Would you just move that on there, James, if that's all right? It should be up there. Okay. Jude 12. Is it working, is it, or not? There we go now. Oh, we're gone. There we go now. That's it. So this was actually just from the book of Jude. Many people have actually read the book of Jude. I'm not going to ask for a show of hands, but it's actually a very, very narrow, small book. But it's got some really good things in it. But actually in Jude 12 it's talking about leaders who were blemished and flawed. It says, these people are blemishes at your love feast, eating with you without the slightest qualm, shepherds who feed only themselves. So whatever role God has given you, the people that he's given you to look after, you've got to look after themselves. It's you know, if you're a cook, you don't just cook for yourself. You cook for those that are given to you. If you're a mechanic, you don't just work on your own cars. You know, you work for other people. In this one here, these were leaders of Israel, and their leaders didn't care about them. So they're clouds without rain. Although that means more in Israel than it does here, just to be clear. Blown along by the wind, autumn trees without fruit and uprooted, twice dead. You see that God isn't terribly pleased in this situation. They are wild waves of the sea, foaming up their shame, wandering stars for whom blackest darkness has been reserved forever. And then the Philippians verse there, a direct command to all of us, do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourselves, not looking to your own interests, but to each of you looking to the interests of others. We're trying to lift other people up. We're not trying to look important ourselves. We're trying to lift God up, that people look and they see him. And then another challenge, and this was why I was talked a little bit about the godly disagreement as well. It's okay to disagree. Just do it in a godly way. Above all, keep loving one another earnestly, since love covers a multitude of sins. Show hospitality to each other without grumbling. As each has received a gift, use it to serve one another as good stewards of God's varied grace. And then we come back to this concept here where Belshazzar really did lose out a lot. Choose your friends very carefully. Somebody said this to me yesterday again, I can't remember who it was, but show me your friends and I'll show you the man, really. In other words, whoever your friends are, you're likely to be very similar. So choose your friends carefully. Being surrounded by people who say yes all the time, that don't encourage, that don't push, that don't sharpen you, is a really, really, really dangerous place to be. Choose people who will speak honestly into your life, and actually be that friend as well. That sometimes you're called to say something that's a bit difficult. Say it in love, but if it's given to you to say and it needs to be said, you've got to say it. That's true love. And I kind of feel that actually this is bringing in the Mother's Day thing. I'm doing very well in this. Is that actually Belshazzar probably never had that correction. He was brought up as a prince. Nobody ever said no to him, and we've seen some examples of that in the real life as well, haven't we now as well? Never said no. wasn't disciplined, wasn't brought to heel, didn't recognize that sometimes he was wrong. And that was probably a lot of his mother's job, but probably she wasn't allowed to do it because he was a prince. And he suffered from that. And that's one of the things we know in our lives. Our mothers consistently show us love. I always knew my mother's here, but I have to be very careful. But I always knew when I got my full name, I was in trouble. Jonathan William Birnie, come here. You know, yeah. So one of those challenges. But my mum's looking appalled at the back now. But anyway, that's beside the point. But look, you need to choose people who consistently show love. And I don't mean love, this sort of woolly, washy, whiffy thing. Sometimes love causes you to have to do difficult things. Love sometimes involves sacrifice. It sometimes involves saying difficult things. It also involves nice things like encouraging and giving presents and spending time with people. But love's a two-way street. And Belshazzar didn't have that, as far as I can see. But we are commanded to have it. And just a few verses then on that. And we are coming to broadly into an end now. But Proverbs 18:24, a man of many companions may come to ruin. So you're always running out with loads and loads of different people and different groups to be seen in the set, may come to ruin. But there is a friend who sticks closer than a brother. Proverbs 27:6-9, faithful are the wounds of a friend. A friend won't want to hurt you, but sometimes they'll feel they have to say something. Profuse are the kisses of an enemy. I always look at the Hollywood, lovely to see you. And actually they would knife you in the back to actually stop you getting the film. That type of thing. That seems to me, I look at the Hollywood thing and I see a lot of that, whereas true friendship, as I see, it's sharpening each other, it's encouraging, it's pushing each other as well. So that was the Proverbs. And then oil and perfume make the heart glad, and the sweetness of a friend comes from his earnest counsel. So again, be that friend. Don't be scared to say something if you're worried that your friend is getting into trouble, because that's part of what loving is. A couple of other ones. Make no friendship with a man given to anger. Somebody who's quick-tempered. Just watch your association. Don't go with a wrathful man, lest you learn his ways. Isn't that the challenge? You learn, if you live with somebody, if you spend a lot of time with somebody, you learn their ways. So just be careful there. And then 1 Corinthians 15:33, do not be deceived. Bad company ruins good morals. So just getting broadly to think now, we are made to worship. We're created for more. Belshazzar worshipped himself, but we're made to worship God. And in the absence of God, we worship ourselves. So how is your relationship with Jesus at the minute? Are you focused on him or actually focused on ourselves? And that's a really good question to ask a lot of the time, because actually sometimes we just become selfish. Living only for ourselves is a road to nowhere. God must be central. And we saw what happened in the other. God made that command as well. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt, out of a land of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. When he was setting up Israel, that was one of the central tenets. No other gods before me. I am your God. I am your Father. I love you. And then there's loads and loads of other verses there, which will not go too much in that. But God is spirit. Those who worship him must worship in spirit and truth. God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. And actually, Psalm 111:10, the fear of the Lord, in other words, deep respect for the Lord, is the beginning of wisdom. Knowledge is knowing that actually if you run towards a cliff, flapping your arms and jump off, you're not going to fly. Wisdom is actually not doing it. Wisdom is knowledge in action. So wisdom, fear of God, actually putting his commands into action. And it's not fear in the sense of terror, it's respect. And it's the same with Psalm 150, and it goes on. We'll not go into it in great detail, but it's basically just saying that we are called to praise God. And why are we called to praise God? Because God is sovereign. And sovereignty means having the highest power or being completely independent. In other words, God answers to nobody. God is fully in control, and God is loving. It's really important to remember that too. It's great that God is in control because he is more loving and more merciful than any of us have any concept of. So kings and kingdoms will follow at his command. This is what's happening with Belshazzar. He's about to lose, but God will win. That's one of the things to remember. It looks like chaos at the one of the times in the world. God isn't in charge. He will win, and we are on the winning side. Those of us that know God as our Heavenly Father through Jesus. So be on the winning side. I'm going to read this quickly, and then we're on to our last slide. But this is an important one. This is the very end of the Bible. And I was reminded of this the other day again. Before Nicola became a Christian, she asked about, what book should I read to understand the Bible? So they told her, you go and read a gospel. So she went, I want to know the end. So she read Revelation. And I always thought that was very funny. I have no idea why, but actually Revelation is really interesting because it does say what's happening at the end. So it says, then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away. If you want to know what heaven looks like, it looks like earth with all the bad gone. No sickness, no death, all the beauty, all the enjoyment, and full and perfect relationship with God. That's what heaven is. So the first heaven and the first earth had passed away. There was no longer any sea. I saw the holy city, the New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride, beautifully dressed for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, look, God's dwelling place is now among the people, and he will dwell with them. They will be his people, and God himself will be with them and be their God. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death or mourning or crying or pain, for the old order of things has passed away. We're made for more. We're made for worship. We're made for relationship. And Belshazzar absolutely opposed God. And he came to a very sticky end. And just to very quickly, I haven't actually focused too much on the story, but can you imagine being Belshazzar? You've seen all the armies are sitting outside the city, ready to break in. And then suddenly this hand appears and starts writing on a wall. It's a bit unusual, by the way. I've never seen it myself. And he was absolutely terrified. And Peter read that bit there, that actually the whole aspect of God has been looking at what you have done. You've been weighed in the scales and found wanting. And by the way, I want to be really clear that that's not the criteria for getting into heaven. Now, some people have taken that off, done more good things or bad things, than bad things. Like, I'll get into heaven. No, this was just God saying that your life is not acceptable. It was just an illustration. We are only become Christians through Jesus, through being forgiven. And then we set off on a new life. So never ever make the mistake of thinking, oh, I've lived a fairly good life. I'm into heaven, it'll be all right. That is not what the Bible says, and I just want to be really, really clear on that. The other thing is just to remind you as well, and if you think about it, it's one of the most famous phrases we have about. I always thought it should be a James Bond film, the writings on the wall. It sounds a bit like that, doesn't it? But we know the phrase, don't we? The writings on the wall, the end is near. But when you think of that phrase, just remember that it's a phrase that God used to bring Belshazzar's attention to the fact that he was in control. And when you hear that phrase, you can remember God's in control. The writings on the wall, but we know where that came from because God sees the end. So ultimately, this is back to Sharon's sheet that Ali's using, that I've used and all this. So what? We've talked about all of this here. What does it actually mean in real life? What does it mean for you and me as we do this? So the first important thing to remind us again is we are dependent on God on a daily basis. One of the really interesting things about being a business owner is that you never know where the next sort of paycheck is coming from. But I'm completely secure in God because God continues to supply. And actually, you're exactly the same. The fact that you've got a job or you have a family, it's all in God's hands. And therefore, I can't worry about it. I just give it to him. So there's that daily dependence on God for what I need to live. And he does give us far more than we need to live, doesn't he? He's good. The second thing is this: in our daily lives, we are called to praise and worship God in both attitudes and actions. And it's the attitude that leads to the actions. So we've got to be thankful. We've got to be dependent on God. We have got to look and have the attitude of we are dependent and we are thankful. And that actually affects the way we live. We saw it affected the way Belshazzar lived because he didn't do it. And it changed the way things went for him. Our friends are crucially important. Who are your friends? And the other side of that is, what type of a friend are you or I? That was the challenge as well. Belshazzar didn't have that either. He had just sycophants around him. We told him what he wanted to hear. That was not love. That was just looking after themselves. Then the next thing is this here: trust God regardless of circumstance. I don't know what your circumstances are at the minute, but everybody here is struggling with something. Some things might be much more serious than others, but everybody walks through the fire sometimes. Everybody walks through the valley of the shadow of death sometimes. We can trust God no matter what circumstance that we are in. I'm sure Daniel, when he was talking to Belshazzar there, was thinking, this isn't going to go well for me. This is not a good boy. I don't want to tell him this. Send somebody else. But actually he did it. He trusted God for his protection even in that circumstance. And then that last phrase, it's an unusual phrase. It's been used 2 or 3 times, but for such a time as this, what does that actually mean? And it really means this, that whatever situation God has put you in, whether your family, your work, or any other situation, his power is absolutely applicable to whatever situation you're in. You might be sitting there thinking, I wish I had somebody else's life, or I wish it was there, or I wish I had this. God is where he wants you, or you are where God wants you to be at the moment. I'm not saying you don't change and you move things, but actually God's power is sufficient for you now where you are. If you're really struggling, take it to him. If you're really struggling, take it to some friends as well and let them walk through it with you. That's what friends are for. But also recognize the fact that you are crucially important to God. God loves you. God cares for you. He wants a relationship with you, whether you're a king or whether you're a pauper. It makes no difference to him. You are the two. You are the, as it were, the jewel. It's not your circumstances. So whatever situation you're in, God's power is sufficient in there. It was sufficient for Daniel. It was actually sufficient for Belshazzar as well. And actually, I often wonder if Belshazzar, even at that point, had turned around and just bowed down and said, I am wrong. God was so merciful. I wonder if he would have actually said, okay, I'll sort it out. But interestingly enough, and we're on to the next scenario, I'm just going to say one thing. This was God, again, looking after his people, because King Cyrus, who came in, was completely different. Had a different way of thinking, different set of laws, different things. And when he came in, he completely changed the approach to the people that had been conquered. Instead of keeping them down and displacing them and trying to make sure they couldn't get together to attack, he actually turned around and said, well, actually, they're more likely to stay with me if I kind of look after them and send them back and give them what they want. So he actually turned around, and his policy was to send people back to the lands they came from and to provide for them so that they then still stayed as part of the empire. And that was very much part of God's plan, to send the Israelites back from exile. So even as he was dealing with Belshazzar, he was dealing with a dozen, thousands, millions, billions of other decisions as well, to bring things together that God's will be done. And I'm just going to finish with that phrase as well that we had a couple of minutes ago. Remember this, God will win. He has already won, actually. But in terms of time, God will win. Be on the winning side. So,
Thanks for listening to this message. For more information on what's happening in the life of our church, visit vineyarddungannon.co.uk.